Hey everyone, Robert Ferringo of Doc Sports Services here with your weekend sports betting recap. You can find more videos and information about sports betting at docsports.com. I know I make myself sound like one of the olds when I still say .com, but yeah, go to Doc Sports. You'll find me, you'll find us, you'll find everything you need to be a successful sports bettor. So, okay, this is episode 1 of Robert Ferringo's Weekend Sports Recap. Kind of the idea, the plan here is that we're just going to talk about some of the things that jumped out at me over the weekend. You know, especially this time of the year, weekends are nuts, right? Friday night, you have some marquee college football, NBA and NHL full steam ahead. Saturday, it's all college basketball and all college football now. Sunday, football, NFL football, professional football, and some Big Ten action in college basketball and random college basketball games. So there's a lot happening over these 72 hours, and it can be difficult to digest, right? So what I'm going to do is every Monday, I'm going to come here and just try and sort through and sift through some of the things that jumped out at me. Now, obviously, I can't talk about everything that happened over the weekend. I would love to get into the DeMar DeRozan, Drake beef in the NBA, but I will save kind of the mainstream stuff for more mainstream media outlets, whatever you follow. This is going to be a little bit more niche, a little bit more sports betting focused, and just kind of talking about, again, things that I noticed, things that jumped out at me, tidbits, bad beats, misleading finals, injuries, just random sports betting stuff that may be useful to us moving forward, right? These things don't happen in a vacuum. What happened over this past weekend is going to influence what happened and who you wager on next weekend. So I thought we could just come together, process some of this information, and see what we could get out of it. If you ever have anything over the weekend that you would like me to maybe focus on, talk about, or get into on the show, please feel free to email me at robert@docsports.com, and I'll see what I can do. So, all right, this weekend, since this is the first show, and I don't have a full structure yet for what this is going to be, and yes, I will have a free play for you at the end. I'm going to focus on college football, since that was a sport that had kind of the most moving parts last weekend. So obviously, I'm not going to go through every box score of every game, but I just want to hit on some few quick hit thoughts of some games and some results that I was interested and intrigued about. Don't forget, on Wednesdays with Rafael Esparza, we do a show about What Are the Odds is the name of it, where we talk about what are some of the numbers, line movements, some things on the boards that jump out at us. I always think that it's helpful to go back and look at some of those things and see, okay, what did I think on Wednesday? What was I concerned about? And then look back on Monday and say, okay, what actually happened? And where was the difference there? Was I right about? What was I wrong about? What happened that I wasn't expecting? So, okay, we're going to start college football. Few quick hitters, and then I'm going to deep dive into a little bit on 4 or 5 other games. All right, first thing that jumped out at me was Tulane crushing Charlotte 34-3. Now, again, random, right? You're not going to see those highlights on ESPN, but Tulane just continues to prove itself as one of the best mid-major bets in the country. They're 7-2 against the spread, and they are just laying waste to people. They have 3 games left. Okay, they play Temple this week, then they're at Navy, then they have Memphis. That the Navy and the Memphis games are going to be big games. Those are some teams. They both had a cup of coffee in the top 25. Also, mid-major teams that at certain points were in the conversation of could they possibly make the playoffs. Those are going to be some big games. It's going to be interesting to see what Tulane's continued success against the spread influences those numbers. Now, I mentioned Memphis. That was another surprising result to me, was that they went on the road and they lost outright to UT San Antonio. This is a rebuilding UT San Antonio team. They haven't been very good, but they were obviously way up for this game. You know that this was a game that they had circled at the beginning of the year. So they played their best game. And Memphis, you know, they'd kind of flirted with some poor results and not covering some spreads in the past few weeks. And then they finally got bit by the upset bug. So that was one that a little surprising to me that it happened, although I did have some reservations about the way Memphis was trending. Another game was Ole Miss. Ole Miss just absolutely took Arkansas to the woodshed. They scored 63 points. They won 63-31. That game was a mess. I absolutely did not see that happening. Arkansas was at home. They have been a very good underdog over the last 2 or 3 seasons. You got that coaching staff there that's trying to save its jobs, right? Ole Miss had been soft. They really hadn't beaten anyone of note yet this year. They really had not been impressive at all. That was impressive what they did on Saturday. There was absolutely no look ahead to the Georgia game this week where I thought there may be. I could see that game at Arkansas becoming more of a rock fight. It absolutely 100% didn't. And what's going to be interesting about that is Georgia didn't look good against Florida. I'll talk more about that game in a little bit. And Ole Miss just absolutely hammered Arkansas. What's that going to do to the number for their game this weekend? How many points are the odds makers going to shave off? And what is that going to do to the betting percentages as gamblers are victims of this kind of recency bias, right? Like what just happened is the most important thing that ever happened. So that Ole Miss score was a shocker. Minnesota going on the road at Illinois. That was one of the games that Raphael and I touched on a little bit last week. A little surprising that Minnesota was a road favorite given how tough Illinois had been. The success that Illinois had at home and as an underdog. Minnesota held up their end of the bargain. I was able to connect with Illinois on a teaser. I teased that number from 3 up to 10. I'm glad that I did. They lost by 8 points, but kudos to Minnesota for proving that spread was right on the money. One of the plays that I released to my clients that I hit was Kentucky plus 17.5 over Tennessee. My quick takeaway from this is that Tennessee in the betting against Tennessee as a big dog and betting on the under in Tennessee games seems to be the way to go. All right. Everyone talks about Josh Heupel, this offense, Tennessee score 1 million points. That's not them. They're not very good offensively. They really have some issues on that side of the ball that I think are going to linger as we get into November and bowl season and potentially playoff season with them. So keep an eye out on that. Kentucky easily covered that number against the Vols. South Carolina pulled the upset. This was another pick that I had that I released to my clients. Texas A&M, they were right at the top of the SEC. And when you get like 2/3 through the season, through the regular season, and there's a team that's in first place that you don't expect to be, or there's a team that's undefeated a little longer in conference play than you expect them to be, and you go back and you look at their schedule and you're like, they really haven't played anyone, stuff like that. It's time to start betting against teams like that. I thought A&M was a really soft favorite going on the road in a South Carolina, a team that's played a lot of very, very talented teams, very tough this year. And they were. That game was never really close. South Carolina beat them by 24 points. A&M, I feel like their bubble has burst, and they're going to be a team to fade a little bit here down the stretch. Now, my 7-unit play that I won, actually, was Iowa over Wisconsin. And it didn't surprise me. I'm mentioning, I say that this is a space to talk about things that jumped out at me or surprised me or maybe went a little bit different way. No, this one went exactly the way that I thought. And my long-term takeaway from that game is that Wisconsin's bad. They're not a very good program right now. They have been. They probably will be again at some point in the future. But this is just a soft, not very good Badgers team. Wisconsin used to live for games like this at Iowa, 3-point spread. You expect this one to be a 17-16. Again, just kind of street fight. It wasn't at all. It was 14-3 at halftime, and then Iowa absolutely hit the Jets in the second half. So, and that Iowa offense, good thing that Ferentz got rid of his kid. They keep cashing on the over as well, scoring 40 points again for Iowa. So we'll see if that can continue. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the big play at Doc Sports this weekend. Congratulations to Doc Sports for hitting their 8-unit Big Ten game of the year. Kind of a marquee play on the site. It's really, I'm not going to get too much into the history. We have an article about it on the website. But the Big Ten game of the year is really what put Doc Sports on the map in this industry. Back when Maury Mosman was making the picks back in the day, it once won 19 straight years. I want you to think about that. He won his Big Ten game of the year 19 straight years at one point over the 70s, the entire decade of the 80s and into the early 90s. So this year they had Washington over USC. Washington, the home underdog, pulled the outright upset. Still weird to think of Washington over USC as a Big Ten game of the year, but that's the world that we live in right now. And then finally, of the ones I just want to kind of gloss over was SMU, -7 against Pittsburgh. Big game in the ACC, and it was not close. SMU obviously is legit. They absolutely laid the lumber to Pitt in that game. Little bit surprising. Pat Narduzzi's Pitt team is always kind of really sneaky good in those underdog situations. Yeah, not this week. You could tell that SMU was really excited to have a home game with major ACC implications, right? Like, this team is stepping up in class in conferences, and a lot of people didn't expect them to do well. It usually hasn't gone very well when teams step up from those second tier, third tier conferences and try and play their way up. SMU is making it work, and you could tell that they were excited to have this opportunity in front of their home crowd, and they really played like it. SMU is now 5-1 against the spread, and they're playing much better than what they were early on in the season. Now, they blow out Pitt in this top 25 nationally televised matchup, right? They are now on the inside track to go to the ACC championship game, play for that automatic bid. They're knocking on the door of the playoffs. Will they have a letdown next week? And what are their numbers going to be? Their next 3 weeks, they play Boston College, at Virginia, at Cal. So 2 out of those 3 games are at home. All 3 of those games, they should be double-digit favorites. Big, heavy double-digit favorite. They are a favored team. They're the ACC favorites right now. What does that win against Pittsburgh? Nice 7-unit hit for Arun Shiva, by the way, on that game with SMU. What does that do to their number? What does that do to their value now moving forward? It was a game that had some real serious implications that we could see over the next 3 weeks in terms of ACC betting odds. All right. So with that in mind, let's go into the 4 or 5 games that I kind of circled that I wanted to talk to a little bit more specifically. And transitioning to another ACC game was Miami against Duke. Okay, they were at home against the Blue Devils, 20.5-point favorite. This was when I had a small play on Miami. Didn't trust them. I actually teased this one also with my betting down to 13.5. So Miami ends up winning the game 53-31. And again, if you weren't watching the game because you have a life, you have kids, you got stuff going on the weekend, and you just picked up the box score Saturday night, Sunday morning, or even Monday, and looked at this game, you'd be like, wow, Miami, very impressive. Top 10 team. They just keep getting it done. They blew Duke out of the water. That is absolutely not what happened in this game. I used this Miami game small when I released it, mainly because I don't think Duke is very good. I think they played a really weak schedule. I don't think they're a particularly talented team. I just really don't like Duke. And I think they had some favorable results. They were going on the road for the first time, leaving the state of North Carolina for the first time in a long time. And I just thought that they were due to get ramrodded by someone, right? And it seemed like as good a spot as any. That's absolutely not what happened. They were winning at the half. They were up 11 points in the second half. They were up 28-17 early in the second half. Miami was only up 8 with about 8.5 minutes left in this game, and Duke had the ball. With about 9 minutes left in this game, forget about Miami covering. Were they going to win this game? Were they going to throw up on themselves like they have so many times in the past few years, past decades, really, once again, and lose a game that they were a monster favorite, like when they almost lost out at Cal? Okay, like I just keep waiting for it. This is why I've been betting against Miami. I do not believe in this team. I think they're more hype than anything. Their numbers are way out of whack, and I think that they are going to continue to be. But they could have lost this game. Instead, they end up winning by 22 points. Pretty much everything that could have gone right for them in the last 8 minutes went well. Duke had the ball 4th and 6 near midfield, and Duke decides to punt instead of going for it. I would have liked to have seen them be a little bit more aggressive. You're a 3-touchdown underdog, and if they pick up that first down, all of a sudden Miami is in like, oh hell no mode, right? Instead, they try and punt. It's a 24-yard punt, so it didn't even flip the field. They weren't even able to pin them or anything like that. Miami scores a touchdown, Duke interception. Miami gets another touchdown. Then Duke fumbles. So no backdoor. So again, very misleading final. And Cam Ward, great player. A lot of people really excited about him. He actually had 2 turnovers in the fourth quarter that could have cost his team the game or, at the very least, cost them covering the spread. He had an interception, and then he fumbled at the Duke 5-yard line at a time in the game where they could have just taken 3 knees and kicked the field goal and felt good about it. He fumbled on a first down. So some poor play there. And again, I know people want Miami to be something they're not. They want the good old days to be back for the Hurricanes, and they want this team to be a national title contender. They're not. I'm telling you that they're not. I'm glad I cashed this ticket. I'm glad I won this game. I'm happy for Miami that they covered this number. I'm telling you, be very, very careful buying in to this Miami team. They have shown over and over and over the last 2 seasons, they want to lose games. Okay. They are going to do everything they can to not cover these big spreads and to potentially blow games. So just tread very, very lightly with Miami. So that 100% jumped out at me. Now the next game is Georgia, Florida, cocktail party. I briefly mentioned this game earlier, but Georgia did not look good. So this one I'm coming at from 2 ends. I'm a little frustrated myself. This was the last game that I added to my card, was a 1-unit play on Georgia. And you can tell just by the fact there's a 1-unit play that I didn't really commit to it, didn't really believe in it. And I wish I had, okay, because all week I kind of liked Florida, but then the more I started thinking about it Thursday, Billy Napier is a dead man walking. Georgia with the extra time to prepare. Look, here's the bottom line. Georgia's not as good as everybody thinks that they are. All right. I'm not going to disparage anything about what they've done the last few years. You can't. It's a historic run. They won back-to-back national championships. You look at their regular season SEC record, the last few heading into this season, it is historic. All the talent that they sent to the NFL draft. 2 things about Georgia now and moving forward. Number 1, they don't have the level of talent that they did on those teams. Those teams are better than what Georgia is packing right now. Number 2, if you go back and look at those national championships years and even last year, Georgia's schedule was a joke, an absolute joke. They were never tested. They weren't playing good teams. Any decent team that they did have to play, they had weeks to prepare for. So everything kind of cut right for them the last few years. Not only that, but after a team goes on a historic run like that, the odds makers are going to catch up to them. Well, Georgia's 2-6 against the spread now on the season. They're 1-6 against the number since that opening win over Clemson. All right. The books have obviously caught up to this Georgia team. And this is important because they are still on that national championship shortlist, still in the top 10, still in the top 5, still considered to be one of the best teams in the country. But I got to tell you, as someone who lives in Georgia, who is surrounded by the UGA hype and realism, you talk to any Georgia fan around here, they'll tell you these guys aren't playing very good. Carson Beck was overrated coming into the season. I never bought into him as the number 1 overall pick. What? Who? This guy? No, he's not playing very well. They're not playing very well. But again, as we get closer to the end of the season, the playoffs, the national championship, their numbers aren't going to come down. People just keep waiting for this Georgia team to be something that I think that they are not. So a little bit like Miami, as those numbers start going up, I'm starting to look the other way. And this effort against Florida was just another reason why. Like, this was tailor-made for them, right? It's a familiar venue. It's an opponent they've dominated in recent years. They're healthy. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Florida's got a lot of noise going on in the background there, and Georgia couldn't put them away. And if Florida's quarterback didn't get hurt, maybe Florida pulls the upset in that game. That could have been a potential job saver, at least job extender for Florida. Now, with the Gators, I have used them several times in the last month as premium selections to my clients. And one of the things I say in my write-ups is people might have jumped off this Florida team a little too early. They might have buried them on this season a little too early. Not that they're any good. Billy Napier is a joke, and this team is mediocre. But they're still playing hard. They still do have some talent. So who they are and what they're doing compared to what the expectations aren't matching up with Florida. That's why they've covered the spread 5 straight weeks. Okay. Listen to what they still have in these next 4 games. They're at Texas this week. They will once again be a 3-touchdown underdog. They get LSU at home. LSU plays Alabama this weekend in what is basically a playoff elimination game. LSU and Alabama both have 2 losses. Whoever loses that game is has no chance of making the playoffs. So LSU could be in either a letdown spot or a deflated spot on the road at Florida. Florida will be a home underdog in that game. They play against Ole Miss, who we just talked about, who can hang 63 points. So another massive number for Florida. And then they end with Florida State, who is just as bad. And Florida may be favored in that game. I want no part of Florida laying points. But what I'm saying is Florida's 5-0 against the spread, just played really well against one of the best teams in the country, most talented teams in the country, I guess we'll say. There might still be some meat on the bone with the Gators cashing tickets. Okay, I think they can cash in 2 or 3 of these next 4 games. So, don't leave them for dead. I think as long as Billy Napier is there, if they pull the ripcord on him and fire him in season or before the end of the regular season, all bets are off, because then all the rats are leaving the ship. But while he's still there, I think that there's still a little bit of value with this Gators team. All right. Next game, Penn State, Ohio State. I'm not going to talk too much about this one other than to say Penn State is exactly who we thought they were. Okay. They can't beat top 10 teams. They can't beat Ohio State. You're talking about a team that'll probably, because of its schedule and the hype that they had coming into the season, will probably play its way into that 12-team playoff. Do you have any confidence in Penn State winning a playoff game? I almost hope they do. I almost hope they make the playoffs as, that 10 or 11 team, play that 5 or 6 team somewhere in there and win, and then go up against one of the top 4 and just get housed, because that's who they are under James Franklin. Okay. And that's not bad. Look, I'm a Syracuse fan. I would love it if Syracuse was like just a top 20 team every year. And Penn State is a top 10, top 20 team just about every year. Sometimes good is good enough. But Penn State is not going to make that next step. And I know that they were some people's kind of dark horse national championship contender. They really weren't. And they really aren't. And they're not going anywhere. Another team that's exactly who we thought they were is Clemson. And that's the next game, that Louisville-Clemson game. Yes, Clemson went on a nice little mid-season run after they overcame the embarrassment of that Georgia loss in week 1. And I got to give them credit. We have seen in past years top 10 teams that play other top 10 teams in that week 1 marquee game, and they lose or get blown out, and that submarines their season. Okay, we saw it happen at Florida State that one year when them and Alabama were number 1, number 2, played in the opening week. Alabama freight trained them, and Florida State never recovered. We've seen that happen to other teams before. So kudos to Clemson for not falling into that trap door and covering some spreads and beating some bad teams. But the reality is everything that everyone was saying about Clemson after that week 1 loss to Georgia, and even before that week 1 loss to Georgia, about their inability to adapt to the new reality of college football regarding transfers, Dabo's inability to get with the times, to change up his schemes, to just do things differently, to evolve, and that he was kind of holding this program, which, he built into this powerhouse, but he's now the one kind of holding it back. That's truth. That's who Clemson are. Okay, they're kind of losers. They got hammered in that game. They were never really close in that game. And they have gotten beat pretty badly by really the only 2 good teams that they've played this year. So what does that say for them going forward? They're 1-3 against the spread in their last 4 games, and they have to be out of the playoff picture now. So where's the motivation there? Do I think they can dig deep and blow out, some losers that are still on their schedule? Sure. But against any top 20, top 35 teams, we have another situation here where the myth of Clemson and the inflated perspective of where this program is not matching up with the results. So all the value right now is betting against Clemson in these big situations. I mean, they were a double-digit favorite in this game. They played like a double-digit underdog. Really, Louisville controlled them. Also have to give a shout out to Dabo. His decision-making while they were trying to furiously mount that comeback that was never happening, his inability to do basic math, okay, knowing when to go for 2 to cut it to a 2-score game instead of kicking the extra point and leaving it a 3-score game. He needed to go for 2, and he had 2 chances to do it. He screwed it up twice. He couldn't do the math. where they scored a touchdown, if they get a 2-point conversion, they make it a 16-point game, 2 scores. Now, granted, 2 touchdowns, 2-point conversions. Likelihood is still small, but mathematically, that's the way you go versus kicking the extra point in the fourth quarter and leaving it a 3-score game. The fact that he blew that again, it just shows that this guy, he's not with the game where it is now. Okay, and keep that in mind about Clemson going forward. From the Louisville side, I will also say this team's pretty good, man. This was kind of a rebuilding year. I love Jeff Brom. I'm all in on this guy turning Louisville into the next next ACC power. I won't say the next ACC power, but he just keeps cashing tickets as an underdog too. We got to keep that in mind next time we see a Jeff Brom team catching points. That is his preferred role. He used to do it at his old stop. He's doing it now at Louisville. All right, last game that I wanted to kind of get into in college football was the Oregon-Michigan game. I'm sure some of you were on both sides of this. Some of you cashed with Oregon and, were high-fiving. What a genius play that was. And some of you, like me, had Michigan and really can't believe how that game ended, right? For those of you that don't know, Oregon was a big favorite in that game, laying over 2 touchdowns to the Wolverines in the Big House. I took Michigan. Oregon's the number 1 team in the country. The team with that number 1 on them could be college basketball, could be college football. They're always paying a premium. You're always paying a premium for betting on the number 1 team in the country. There's never value betting on the number 1 team. It's usually betting against them. And them going on the road, Michigan making a last stand, I thought the value would be with the underdog. I thought they'd come to play. Now, Michigan didn't play well at all. Really, Oregon outplayed them, outgained them by about 200 yards. Oregon still benefited from some bad calls. That first touchdown catch, which I cannot believe they didn't review. The ball obviously hit the ground, was not a touchdown early in that game. Wouldn't have changed the game, I don't think. Oregon was the better team. However, controversial play that swung this game and took it from a Michigan cover to an Oregon cover. It was 31-17. Oregon had the ball inside Michigan's 5-yard line, under a minute to play. Michigan, I don't recall if they were out of timeouts or they just weren't using their timeouts. They were conceding, basically. The game was over. Oregon could have taken a knee, 131-14. Michigan backers like myself would have covered. They did not do that. On 3rd and 2, they ran a play and scored a touchdown to make the final score 38-17, to rub it in Michigan's face, to cover the spread, to inflate their margin of victory. And it's just kind of my opinion on that. I know some people are like, oh, well, if you don't like it, stop them, Michigan. No, it's still poor form. Okay, Michigan had conceded. Oregon had won that game. You take a knee, you take your win, you walk off. That was bad karma, what Oregon did. And that stuff always finds its way back around. I promise you that it will. It was just kind of an unnecessary play. Now, I know you're like, oh, you're just bitter because you had Michigan. If you had Oregon, you would have loved it. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that sentiment. If I had Oregon, I would have been happy as hell. It doesn't change that we have to be objective about this. And the objective thing is that it was kind of a dirty pool. It was kind of a dirty move by Oregon. And it's going to be interesting to see when that comes back to bite them. I also understand why Oregon does it. It's a beauty pageant in college football. The playoffs, the seeding, all that's based on voters. This has always been the problem with college football. I'll save that rant for another problem. But the difference in that margin of victory could have real implications on where they are seated in the playoffs. So I understand why they did it. And I guess that's, surprising. Recap, spin it forward, right? That's what we have to remember about this, is that teams aren't going to call off the dogs because there is value to them and they are rewarded for running up the score by the voters, right? Because a few weeks from now, when they're doing playoff seeding, voters are going to look back and say, okay, they're going to look at their schedule and just look at the results. They're not going to say, you know what, we shouldn't consider that Oregon-Michigan game that much of a blowout because of that shady play at the end. And how those decisions outside of the gambling sphere have real-world implications for bettors, right? So that was a takeaway from that. So those were some of the things I was looking at college football. Sorry I didn't get to the NFL. Real quick, I can throw out some thoughts. Jets finally win and cover, but don't get sucked into them. Carolina beating New Orleans outright. I put that in my write-up when I released that play, that there's no way the Saints should have been favored by a touchdown in that game. I am very angry that I didn't use the Ravens. That should have been a game of the year. Not only was it not a game of the year, I didn't even have it on my card. That was probably the biggest mistake I'm going to make this entire NFL season. Love that game. Nick Sirianni is a stone cold loser. Matt Eberflus is a stone cold loser. Anyone that bought into Joe Flacco and Jameis Winston are kidding themselves. And also right now, just the NFL is a really bad product. So that's my super quick hit thoughts. So, okay, that is the weekend recap this week, focusing on college football. Hopefully we'll check back next Monday while I break down more college football. I will work in some more NFL. I will work in some college basketball and NBA. I promise each week we're probably not going to focus so much on just one sport, but since this was the first time I was doing it, I'm just kind of making this up as it goes along. And this show will take shape kind of naturally and organically, and we'll just see how it goes over the next few months. So, all right, you waited all this long. Free play next week. Take the over in the Ohio State-Purdue game. Ohio State, that final score a little bit misleading in terms of total points because Penn State had 2 turnovers inside Ohio State's 10-yard line. Like I mentioned, Ohio State's going to be motivated to run up the score against a bad Purdue team. I can see Ohio State hanging 50 on the board all by themselves in that game. So take over 53 next week for Ohio. So, all right, that's it for the weekend recap. Thanks for stopping by. Carpe diem and good luck.